So hello and welcome to week 11, can you believe it, of a 12-week series, so we've only got one more left, about communicating a crisis, how to change your communications at this time, but also how to prepare for what happens afterwards. This week we're going to be specialising or focusing on writing for your audience, which is something that we'll touch upon several of our previous episodes. It is very, very relevant. The structure for today is going to be we're going to be starting with the importance of good copy at any time, but particularly this time. Then we'll be moving to places where copywriting can make a difference, but also how the purpose might be different depending upon where you are, how to use copy to represent your brand well, and also then tips to make your copy engaging. Then we'll move, as always, to Q&A. If you do have any questions, then we can talk through those. It won't be recorded because it means that you can be anonymous, you can talk openly without being worried that your question will be immortalised, and you should only really benefit from Q&A if you turn up. The rest of the series, which is one more, can be booked on for theidealmarketingcompany.co.uk/crisis-communications. And we're very lucky today to have Natalie here with us from Writer for You. Natalie is a copywriter, and she does website copy, blogs, profiles, newsletters, and copywriting workshops. And I think, is there anything that you want to tell us about how the copywriting workshops go, what the kind of process is, to explain that to us?
Yeah, that'd be great, thank you. The workshops are something that I brought in because I felt that a lot of people I talked to had great stories and a lot to say about whether it's their products or their services, how their business works. But when you ask them why they didn't blog or how they communicated those stories for their business, a lot of business owners lack confidence.
Right.
Is the biggest issue I found, whether it was confidence in having enough to say or their own spelling and grammar. Obviously often there's the issue of timing as well. If you're running a business, you have to focus your workload, don't you? You have to be careful what you spend your time on. And this is the thing with marketing as a whole, is that often it's the thing that gets put at the bottom of the list, because as long as you've got work there, you're not necessarily thinking about what's going to come next and how you make sure you keep that
keeps
flow.
coming. Yeah, so that sounds like yeah, confidence. I can completely appreciate that for a lot of people at a blog. When's your next workshop coming up?
Well, that's a very interesting one, Jess. I've struggled to do them online. In fact, they work really well online, but it's the managing timescales that I'm struggling with at the moment. So I have an online workshop available, which is one that you can do yourself for the blog planning. What I'm offering at the moment is that if you want to, we can do one-to-one sessions or consultancy around the workshop, rather than trying to arrange workshops, which I can't get my head around.
Well, I guess that actually means you get more value at this time. So if that sounds like you, then make sure you follow up with Natalie. But she'll be the resident expert today, or talking about copywriting, because you're describing me essentially. I used to really enjoy writing. I was quite comfortable, and then once any pressure was put onto it, it kind of wrecked how comfortable I felt. And there's that very much fear of the blank page. So I think sometimes writing at all can feel like this cycle of fear and judgment and where do I even start, etc. So but really today we're going to cover, I suppose, bigger subjects than that, because at the end of the day, if somebody wants to get to the bottom of those things, they can come and do your workshop. It's more about why copy is important and tips and stuff. So right at the beginning of this whole series, we talked about how to change your communications at this time, and the focus was really to move from promotional messages to more brand building exercises. That's more appropriate to what's going on for a lot of companies. It's being sensitive to the fact that some people may have absolutely no money at all. It's a very sad time for some people as well. There's a lot of fear, so it's not appropriate to be really pushing messages of just promoting and wanting to sell. What this means that there is a move from outbound marketing to inbound marketing. Outbound is the stuff that interrupts somebody's day. I think that's the best way to think of it. That's the banner ad, it's the phone call, it's the buy this product now. Inbound marketing is more the how to do this content. It's the social media stuff, it's the did you know, it's guides to help people to do things and to understand things that they might be looking for rather than is being forced upon them. So that's the difference, is a lot softer. What it also is far more brand building, and it's more about building an idea of who you are as a company and a positive feeling. At the end of the day, whatever you do at the moment will be remembered, and it will when things return to normal. So you can do an awful lot to build those relationships so that when things return to the new normal, let's say, because who knows what that's going to look like, when things return to the new normal, they will feel more confident putting their trust in you and their money with you as well. The other very big move has been from having those in-person interactions, maybe at networking or events or things like that, to being very much online. Your touch points with your ideal customers are so much more likely to be online, and I think people who've got email newsletters are pretty happy with themselves at the moment if they've got a strong online presence. So that's very, very important. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Natalie?
No, I mean, I think you covered most of it there. I think one thing I would say is that in terms of this in-person to online thing, it's really interesting that obviously also includes these kind of interactions.
Yeah.
And when we often can get concerned about how we present ourselves online because it's in writing, and because once those words are there on the screen, we get a bit scared to kind of let them go. Whereas we're now in a position where even the things that we're saying are also there on screen for people to see. And while that can in itself cause concerns for that reason, because you kind of lose control of them once you've let them out there, the other side of that is people are hearing your voice. And one of the things that we as copywriters and you in marketing, Jess, will talk about is the tone of language we use and the tone of voice we use when we're communicating. And while people think about their tone of voice when they're speaking, and this is something that we're now coming across when we're doing videos and talking to people online, we often don't reflect that in our written word. Those companies that engage with us best are often those where we feel their communication is reflective, both spoken and written, if that makes any sense. We feel like we're talking to the same person when they're writing or when they're speaking.
I have people that I speak to quite regularly who are very, very friendly, likable people, and when I get an email from them, I feel like I've maybe done something wrong. And it's not consistent, and it's something where maybe they've learned a very formal style. That could be to do with their education. It's definitely not on brand, and doesn't do anything to kind of build the relationship. So it's and we are going to talk about that. So I suppose it's also the importance of good copy at any time, as well as at this time. I think the same applies. It's just that there's a shift to that, to more online, to more inbound, to more brand building, and it's forcing people to do things that actually would have been a good idea anyway, and be more aware of it. I think being consistent with your tone of voice is important. And we will be talking about marketing channels, but I think your email and email newsletters, but your other forms of touch points, whether that's just emails backwards and forwards, that's pretty important as well. So what I'll move on to is the kind of places where copywriting can make a difference, and then we will talk about how these kind of change in purpose. So I know that you do website copy generally, but I've split these up into blogs versus sales pages, and also even the homepage, because the tone and the purpose for each of those will be quite different. And some people might even feel that they're very good at blogs because they can be quite informal, but they struggle when it comes to any kind of persuasive language. Email marketing, equally, you need to decide the tone of your email marketing communications, because there's some where there's it's plain text and it's just not ramblings, but it's it can be more freestyle, and there can be very, very formal ones, depending on what's appropriate to your audience. And there's also brochures, and then social media profiles and posts. So I think just looking at those, they've all got very different purposes to them, very different tones. Do you find that people struggle with certain areas more than others, or what patterns do you see when people are trying to write, or when you're trying to write?
I think it's really difficult because for all of these examples you've shown here, we're talking to a big audience that we can't necessarily put a face to.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm gonna mention later on, which I know you talk about a lot, Jess, is this idea of creating avatars so that you understand who your audience is. It's that knowing who you're trying to talk to, because you can't talk to everyone. And when we're looking at blogs and emails and our website, there are different levels of that. So at email marketing, we can be a lot more focused because we know who signed up and where they signed up and what their interests are potentially.
Right. Yeah.
So even though we're writing to a group of people, we can perhaps have a clearer picture of who that person is that's going to be getting that email. Whereas our website, if what we're really doing is appealing to the Google gods, then you don't know who's going to end up there. You can find yourself writing for a search engine rather than real people, and you'll end up with a whole big pile of mess potentially, because your focus is on keywords or hooks or all those other headlines that grab, rather than the person who's we're trying to actually speak to.
Yeah, and the name of this of this particular webinar is writing for your audience. So the audience bit is quite important. It was probably the second in the series that we dealt with persona development. So go back and have a look at that video and go through the process. I do harp on about it a lot because fundamentally, in order to do good quality marketing, you really need to understand who it is that you're talking to and what they care about, and where they are, what they're after. So I agree with you. Things are an awful lot easier when you start with that. Okay, well, what is it that's keeping them up at night? It means that sales pages are engaging, blog posts. You've got a load of subjects that are very much speaking to what their concerns are. Your homepage can also direct people, because you probably won't have one persona, you're going to have several, and you can direct them to different areas of your website. So you're thinking, well, there's several groups of people who could come to land on my homepage, and at the end of the day, not everybody does. It's quite interesting that depending on the website, upwards of 50% of traffic might not land on your homepage, so I wouldn't take it for granted. But if somebody does land on your homepage, knowing how to signpost them to the right area can be very, very important. But I agree with you with email marketing, particularly depending on what your sign up or call to action text is. This is content on this subject. You can be far more targeted, and you know that you are talking very much to your audience. But I would dare anybody to decide to put off people who aren't your audience in the other pages, because it's more efficient. You are going to get the leads that you do get through are more likely to be pre-qualified. They're your actual people that you want to deal with. Social media profiles and posts. I mean, if we're looking on a spectrum here from formal to informal, you're looking at far more friendly things that invoke trust, would make somebody approachable in an appropriate way as well. And some people might think, well, social media, that doesn't require copywriting, it's just a sentence or two. But if you're not consistent across all of these places within a framework, then that's damaging to your brand. The brand at the end of the day is all of the ideas and understanding that somebody has about you and your company. It all gets locked together. And a lot of the time people do just think about brand building as your colors and your fonts and your logo, but your brand is reasserted every time there's a touch point with you, and content can actually have a copy can have a bigger impact on conversion rates than all of the design in the world. That's really what converts people in the end. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that bit.
Just one little thing in that I was going to agree with you about the social media. I think people generally, in my experience, feel a lot more comfortable producing social media than they do anything else, because potentially because they can see who's interacting with it, and they have potentially maybe even put their own face at the top of it. But also it's transient, isn't it? It won't stay on people's newsfeeds forever.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that if you feel that you're lacking in confidence, then social media isn't a bad place to start, because understanding what your audience are looking for there and speaking in the language that they relate to, recognizing the difference between how you as a brand are speaking on your social media as opposed to you on your personal profile, can all help when you're pulling together your voice and your message when you're for your blog or your email.
And you get to have that feedback, as you say, about what people do actually want to see more of. There's a word of caution here as well. With quite a few companies, they might either outsource or have social media done by maybe somebody who's junior in a company or something like that, because they're younger. They might feel more au fait with social media and stuff like that. I would check the voice that's being used, because I've seen before where very formal companies, maybe legal firms, financial firms, are literally speaking like a 16-year-old girl, and that is not on brand. So yes, it's being done, but you might be better that it's not. Is it in line with your target audience? Does it represent your brand? Getting your social media done but not in your voice is not really the ideal. So really do investigate, and it might be necessary to issue guidelines for the kind of language that's appropriate, because just for the audience, I'm not sure you're laughing, so you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is, I want to talk about the purpose of each area, and we've kind of covered it a little bit about brand building, but with a lot of content, the job is either to do brand building, to be engaging, and maybe converting or persuading somebody to do work with you. If I go to the previous list, all of the, apart from sales pages, they always want to be trying to, persuade you, can do all of these jobs. So they can be brand building, they can be engaging, they can be, and particularly social media, you will have content that is attracting and brand building, and then some that will be trying to pull people over the line. I've got a bit to say about algorithms, but I'll get to that. So this is the HubSpot flywheel, which is supposed to replace the marketing funnel. And the reason is HubSpot, if you're not aware of them as a company, they produce software that helps to manage advertising content and kind of put it out there. And I haven't actually used them, but they do develop a lot of content on marketing as well. It's brand building content that they develop. So it's not actually what their main service is. Their service is the software, but it helps you to be aware of them as an expert in the industry. So this is the flywheel, and the point is to attract, engage, and then delight is part of that persuasion. Just move forward to the next one. The attract content is to identify and attract prospects. It's not trying to sell, you're just trying to let them know who you are, what it is that your company is behind, if there's any values that are important. So you're not talking about your product at this point. Engaging them is maybe establishing that you are experts, that you have expertise. It's trying not to bore somebody, not bore, of course you won't bore anybody, but it's trying not to get into the detail too quickly. You know, it's if you ever met somebody at networking and the first conversation that you have with them is, you know, what the product is and how much it is and everything else, and that's when you can't even remember their name at that point. It's quite a jarring experience. Generally what happens is that you build a relationship. You know, you might not even necessarily say what you do in the first couple of first couple of meetings with somebody. Really, if you want for somebody to trust you, you need to talk about some other things as well. You can touch on what you do, but they're getting to know you, and it's the brand version of this. It's starting off by attract can be who are you and what do you have in common, what values do you have, rather than you know, what is it that you sell. Engaging might be more like if somebody's, you know, when you do with networking, I hope people have been networking now, but you can stand up and give you 45 seconds and you're just very quickly going over your expertise. Or sometimes people can give 10-minute presentations, so you're demonstrating expertise and authority. You're still not trying to sell anything. You're still not saying, and here's my product and you can buy it for this much. So this is more likely to be the stuff where there's a problem that somebody wants to solve, and you're not offering to solve it for them for money, but you are giving them some tips to guide them on how to do it. So they're like, okay, I appreciate that. There's the law of reciprocity in there, where they're like, okay, well, you've given me some value here, and the more value you can give them without them giving you any money for it, there's more okay, you've done that, and I kind of feel like I owe you something now, not in a manipulative way, but that can build up over time. And then delights, that's really where you're keeping your current customers even happier by providing them extra value. You can show them more about how your service does work, some details that honestly they wouldn't care about if they weren't seriously thinking about buying from you. There's very specific content that it might be about questions that people have, but it might be like a walkthrough of how your product works. And then that would be talking about more about your product and service and explaining why it would be right. Have you seen this one before, Natalie? I'm sure the concept isn't lost on you completely at all.
No, I haven't actually, but it certainly makes a lot of sense, because those are all elements that we're all aware, you know, we're aware of, or even we're doing when we're not aware of them. I think most of us, when we go out and we start relationships with people, and we, as you say, when we're networking, we go through these stages without even thinking about it, don't we? But actually recognizing the value there is a really important part of how we communicate and what we're offering.
Yeah.
Often people struggle with the idea that they need to be useful and help give people information without charging for it, and understanding where the boundaries are there, and that can be a real barrier for some people, and it is a lot more than we're covering here necessarily. but that it is part of this wheel is really important, I think.
Yeah, well, I think I've seen historically where if you're not trying to sell, it can feel like you're not doing the job. Like the copy should always be call to action to buy the product, and that's not the case. And having some sort of a structure to think, okay, it's okay that a percentage of what I do is not even mentioning the product or the service. I used to run a website selling hair products to redheads and makeup as well, and I think probably 9 out of 10. I had a very, like, the Facebook page was really engaged, like the engagement rate was brilliant, but probably 9 out of 10 of my posts were nothing to do with the hair products. It was a community and people really enjoyed it. Now, when I did then send a promotional post and it was about the products that I sold, I then got far more click-throughs because people, number one, the algorithm at the time was showing those posts because I'd got that engagement rate in the first place, so the posts were actually seen. But I also built trust. That was particularly the case on Facebook because you get that ongoing content going. Now, all of these things will be dependent on your audience. Coming back to writing for your audience, the better you understand them and what's going on in their head. Maybe there was an inciting incident, maybe something happened that made them look for you, and the better that you can create this map. And we've actually got a method for pulling out your personas and then creating social media content for that. Now, I've got a slight caveat about promoting your products on social media. The algorithms around Facebook and Instagram seem to be changing at the moment, where if you are writing a post that is very explicitly either sending somebody to your website or asking them to call you or something like that, you may see a far lower reach. So those posts are likely to reach less of your audience. And the reason behind that fundamentally is social media channels, whichever website you're dealing with, their whole job or their raison d'etre is to get people to stay on that platform, and to, if you're sending a link to somebody else's website, then they're not staying there. You can see how that would backfire. The other thing is that I think, the whole phone call things, I think they want content that is generally engaging, and the assumption is if you're promoting your product, then that's not quite as engaging and brand building. So increasingly what you might find is that, particularly with business to consumer social media channels like Facebook and Instagram, you need to focus on the more brand building activities. And when it comes to promotional posts, you may have to rely more heavily on paid social media content. So allow for that within your whole, have a look at the engagement of posts. If you're finding that your reach is far lower for anything that is promoting your product, then consider, what's the word? It's kind of supporting your social media strategy with some paid content. So they've got to know you via the attracting and engaging content, but when it comes to explicitly asking for something, just add some social media, either booster posts or ads that are there as well, just to pull them over the line, because by then they've hopefully got to know you. You can very easily within Facebook target people who have liked your page before, so that can, or only people who've liked your page before, and that means that you're leveraging a relationship rather than trying to start from scratch. So that's something to consider. Anything coming up for you there, Natalie? I wasn't sure.
That's
okay.
Good.
Right, so how to use copy to actually represent your brand. We talked about very briefly about the different things that you can do, and appreciating that a brand is not just colours and fonts. So I've said tone of voice, formality versus informal, and readability. And the Flesh, I think that's how you say it, reading ease scale helps. It can be a useful, I think, tool to use, but not to get too hung up on. What you can do is put text, there's loads of calculators out there, put your text in there, and it will take your average sentence length, combine it with the average number of syllables, and then spew out a score, essentially, and tell you, well, really, this is equivalent to maybe a reading age of whatever. Online in particular, it's a good idea to make it easier to read. Lots of different things that you can do. So how do you take people through this particular area, Natalie?
You've completely got it. I think tone of voice is really important. The formality and informality is something that people will need to learn what they're comfortable with. And a lot of my thoughts are around that side of things. It's around whether you're conversational, whether you want your text and your words to sound as if you're just talking to somebody, like we are now. Because I think quite often nowadays that's what people expect. We have a very informal relationship with our on-screen copy, and people want to be able to read it without feeling like it's an effort. And that goes back to the reading ease. I think the most basic rules, if you don't want to get into the looking at the numbers, which to be fair are really straightforward, and so many different places you can get those numbers from, is just keeping things short, keeping things clear, keeping the words easy. And the one thing I consistently suggest to people is that you read something out loud before you press publish.
Right.
Because if you find that it doesn't read easily to you, then it's not going to read easily to people who are reading it off the screen. And although that's a different process, although it may seem unnecessary, I often find that when I'm reading something out loud, I don't like the way it flows, or I've used the same word too often, or I need to keep it more clear, and shorten sentences and keep paragraphs tighter and things like that. So sometimes when all is said and done, even for something as short as a social media post, just read it out loud. Because that can make the difference between something that doesn't quite sit right and something that sounds like you.
It's also, if you're keeping words shorter, then you can still be quite formal without being hard to read, or sentences can be shorter. You know, that is possible to be very easy or easier to read while still being formal, particularly for regulated industries. For example, if you're dealing with legal or finance or something like that, it is appropriate, because it generates trust, to probably be more formal, but you can still be readable. And you know, they're not, you don't have, in order to be formal, you don't have to be complicated. I have seen a few times where somebody is using, it almost feels as if the formality has been in order to make them feel more confident. Maybe they're not and this is the irony, I think, in emails. The most high-powered people that I've known write the shortest emails with the most spelling mistakes to me, like one-to-one communication. They don't send that email marketing. And then I find I'm more likely to get very formal, complicated emails from somebody who might be wanting to do work experience. And I think it's because there's that confidence problem sometimes as well, isn't there? But I know this is more about email communication and less about blogs. But yeah, the name of the game is for your audience to actually want to read and be able to read what you've got there. So there are a few tips as well for how to make it easier. I think you've already said replace complicated words with simple words. That's completely correct. I've only picked a few tips because I'm sure that there's so many more that there are, but these are the main ones that I try and use, and that's me not being a copywriter. So use the inverted pyramid for any marketing material. Get to your most important point before getting into the detail. So whether that's why somebody should read on or not, or getting to exactly addressing what is going on in your reader's head that you're addressing, that's going to be a lot easier to do if you've done your personas. So relate then to what you know your customers are thinking about. The better you know your customers, the more you'll understand, and hopefully it'll be several things. They haven't just got one thought going around. Now, this is something that can be quite difficult to do, is try and move from I and we and me to using words like you. And the only way that I managed to do this, obviously because I'm just so, the world's revolving around me, is to write the text and then rewrite it. Because otherwise, if you're trying to write a load of content and you're also thinking, oh, I keep on using I, or I'm not going to move any, write it and then rewrite it. I think be very specific about any actions that somebody should take, and particularly a call to action at the end of stuff. I think with sales pages, one of the worst things that you can do is not be specific about the next action, but that can happen in any content really. Social media, like I said, you've got to be careful with that, because particularly on Facebook and Instagram, you could end up being penalized for actually telling people what they should be doing. And not all content, that's not the point of the brand building content anyway, but where you're moving to delight or try to persuade someone to use your service or product, be specific about next steps. It can also be helpful to break up paragraphs, so that if you're not even reading it, you're just looking at the shape of the text. Bullets and headings can help skim readers. If you're dealing with online content, there's a lot of skimming that happens. Those headings also happen to help the Google gods as well. So they like headings that are helpful, but so do human beings. And I've also got to avoid the passive voice, but I'd be interested in your feedback on that, Natalie, because I keep being told to avoid it and I don't know why. So what have I done? You've just face palms.
It's because I'm scared of this one. It's absolutely true. You know, the rule is avoid the passive voice. The easiest example is this one about the active voice is the cat sat on the mat because the cat is doing the sitting.
Right.
If you use the passive voice, you'd say the mat is being sat on by the cat.
Okay.
And obviously the cat sat on the mat makes more sense, is more impactful, and and clearer. The passive voice is something that is supposed to grab us and make us relate and want to react and do something with the information we're being given. Passive voice is all about stuff that's happening somewhere else and we're not really that bothered. But it has to be said, it's something I struggle with. It's something that I have to actually think, oh, I've missed it there, I've got to turn that bit round. Yes, avoid the passive voice, but we all do it. I mean, let's face it, we all do it when we're speaking.
So not completely, it's like avoid the passive voice where possible, but let's face it, you're probably going to use it. I think it's interesting how often that's what comes back in editing, because I get everything that I write gets edited and proofread. So how often that's the thing, just switch it around. And it can feel almost, when you use the active voice, it can feel a little bit bossy, I suppose.
I think so.
And sometimes I'm like, actually the passive voice is more appropriate, because I'm saying, well, this could happen, or it's a suggestion, and it feels like it's warming people up. So I think there's kind of an appropriateness there as well. I think passive voice, what I've seen is normally they're the voice. Normally it's what's a bit more complicated, and that can be what makes something more difficult to read. So your readability and whether you're using the passive voice, those can work together as well. Did you have anything to say about these points, or anything further to add? Tips for
it has. I like your tips a lot. I think that they cover most of what I was thinking about as well. Again, my first and foremost tip is always make sure you're talking to somebody in particular. Make sure you know who this is for and what they're getting out of it, which is exactly your second point. It's not just about, oh, I need to tell people about this thing that's happening. It's right. I know that this is my audience. I know that I'm providing this thing. How am I going to make them care? How is this important to my audience? And focus on what it is that you're providing that will make their life better, and make that the focus of your writing.
Yeah, I think there's, in marketing generally, the idea that you shouldn't be selling the drill, you should be selling the hole, because when somebody goes to buy a drill, they normally want a hole. But if you take it several steps further, what they actually want is a hole so that they can put the shelf up, so that their partner will stop nagging them, and they will have a better relationship because there isn't any sulking going on. That's what they want. They want to have a good home life.
Yeah.
And to do that, they need a drill, because then they'll do the stuff that they're being asked to do. So, in an efficient way, in the right way. And there's other issues going on there. Obviously, they want something that's going to work and it's going to be durable and will do the job and everything else. So the what I've seen before, and it does depend on the medium, but also, as well as having the inverted pyramid, also trying to maybe only talk about one thing at a time, or focus on one thing. Because if you're thinking about what you want to get over, you're more likely to say, oh, we've got this other thing as well, and this other thing, and it dilutes the message. We see that a lot with press releases in particular, where there's probably quite a lot of things that you could promote about a company, but this story is about this one thing. And particularly when you use the inverted pyramid. Have you got any bits to? I mean, this is the thing, is there's so many tips, and you just could go on and on and on. But are there any kind of primary ones that I've missed out on?
No, I mean, I like, again, it is definitely about you. It's about you, the audience, what you're going to get out of this. So there should certainly be more you than I. But again, I liked the fact that you said, Jess, that writing it out and rewriting it is not a bad thing. Actually, if you have to just get it all out there and then pick it to pieces afterwards, that doesn't mean you're failing. That just means you're thinking it through and getting your message right. Because I think, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, one of the things that I find when I'm talking to people is that the lack of confidence they feel about putting things in writing makes them look at that piece of scribble and think, that's just all wrong then. And they get frustrated and they don't know what to do next, when actually you can just put lines through it and twist things around a bit, or get a new piece of paper and start again. And okay, that may feel like a waste of time, but it's really not, because it's about getting clear your message and your focus and creating the right words to do the job. So don't get frustrated if you're lacking in confidence and not getting the right answers the first time. Just keep trying, and there are people out there who can help you as well. And if that's just, and obviously there are copywriters, but it could even just be going and sticking it under somebody else's nose and saying, read that for me. Because
the enemy is feels like the empty page sometimes, and it's just as long as it's not an empty page, it is progress. And an empty page is perfect, but it's not been done. Sorry.
Better done than perfect.
Yes.
And your headings and bullets and white space, making things as easy to read as possible. Always make it as easy to read as possible. And don't be scared to get it wrong, because in most situations there are ways to say, oops, I made a little mistake, or
I've got an example which might feel a bit inappropriate, but have you ever, for some of your audience, it will always be wrong no matter how well you write it, and for some it will always be right. Have you ever noticed that some spam emails have very obvious mistakes in them, and you just think, well, that's, of course, you're not going to fool anybody with that, that's silly, but actually that's done intentionally, because if somebody will not notice that mistake they've made and falls for that first email, they are not going to then realize later on what they're doing is finding their audience by intentionally putting mistakes in there, because you're getting a more gullible person, a person who's easier to proof. And if they're going to invest the time in getting you further into whatever scam it is, they want to make sure that they've got essentially it's a pre-qualified lead by putting mistakes in there intentionally. So I think that's something to think about, is people will forgive or not notice some things, and for some of your audience it will never be right, just because they're used to a certain level of writing, or or what they prefer.
But it also, going back to what you were saying earlier about formality of language, sometimes it is completely appropriate to have slightly more formal language and to use that structure to promote that side of your brand. And for some people, you would imagine that they might be put off by a certain kind of language, and yet they accept it in certain situations. So while we will all have our own voice and we will all have our own way we want to present ourselves as a brand, and for some that will involve slang or swearing, or you need to be comfortable with what your brand is presenting itself to be. But that is true to the extent that when your audience are reading it, they are making the choice whether or not they read and what they relate to and how they then take that relationship forward. And so don't second guess them. Be who you want to be, as long as you're focusing on providing them the service that you can provide for them.
Yeah, and I think it's doing it consciously. So whatever voice you are using, making the decision to do it for a good reason. If we think about from our own stuff, our social media posts are obviously quite relaxed, whereas our terms and conditions are reassuringly formal. That so there's that element as well. But yeah, make sure that you're making a choice about your tone of voice and the way that you write stuff. Right, so I think that's it. So the final episode is next week, Wednesday the 17th at 11 a.m. I haven't decided what I'm doing yet. So if there is something that you want to learn about for the final, you know, if you've thought, oh, I was really hoping that this was going to be covered, then let me know. Email jess@idealmarketingcompany.com if there's a topic in particular. If you also know an expert like Natalie who you think would be great to be the final guest, then please do let me know. You can also register for it at idealmarketingcompany.co.uk. That's easy for me to say. .co.uk/crisis-communications. I want to thank Natalie again for joining us today, and we're going to move on to Q&A, which is not recorded.